Kia ora koutou katoa, I'm Simon Morton, and could you please clap again? Now this is radio and this is live. I don't normally do live, so could you clap one more time? Thank you. We are recording this evening for Radio New Zealand National. And welcome to this evening's discussion, Appetite for Change, hosted by the Institute of Professional Engineers New Zealand and the New Zealand Institute of Food Science and Technology. Over the next hour, we'll be exploring how technology is dishing up new food and challenging the way it's produced, cooked and consumed. There will be questions at the end, so save those up and there'll be an opportunity to get your questions towards the end. We've got a feast of food knowledge, lots of culinary experience and passion before us this evening, and I thought I'd just take you through the specials tonight. Martin Bosley, celebrity chef and cooking guru. Martin Bosley is one of New Zealand's most respected and outspoken chefs who, I quote, knew the difference between a profiterole and an eclair by the time I was 13. That's impressive.
Nine.
Nine?
Yeah.
I knew how many I could eat when I was about 15, and it was about 7 eclairs. But knowing the difference, that's impressive. As well as running a very successful restaurant, food business, and publishing empire, Martin is the co-founder of Wellington's popular City Market, a weekly food and wine market showcasing some of the best of the produce from this region, as well as his own exquisite bacon sandwiches, which they're pretty hard to turn down. His lunchbox is brimming with culinary awards, so welcome to Martin. Torben Sorensen is a food engineer and a director of Sorensen Laboratories in Auckland, which specialises in all areas of food technology and consultancy. His background is in microbiology and molecular biochemistry, and this means Torben knows what happens to our food, how it's made, processed, preserved and packaged. I'd love to go shopping with this man. I think it'd be a pretty interesting experience looking at all those labels. Laura Vinson is a consumer, author and food blogger. She has written her food blog, hungryandfrozen.com, don't look at it now, since 2007. She also writes cafe reviews for the Sunday Star Times and frequently contributes to food and travel writing for the national newspapers. Her writing has been published in Cuisine, Bust Magazine, 3news.co.nz and Vice.com. Food and Vice, so I must have a look at that. Laura's first cookbook, Hungry and Frozen, will be published by Penguin and it's going on the shelves later this week. Welcome,
Friday.
Laura. Friday. Finally, Jacqueline Raworth is Professor of Agribusiness at University of Waikato. She is the President of the New Zealand Grassland Association, has a PhD in Soil Science from Massey University, is a Companion of the Royal Society of New Zealand, a Fellow of the New Zealand Institute of Agriculture, and in 2008 she was awarded Companion of the New Zealand Order of Merit for services to agricultural sciences. I bet she's got quite a productive garden.
She has a townhouse.
It's a townhouse.
And is hardly there,
all that
sadly.
Farming knowledge wasted. Well, let's start by looking at how food is grown and produced. And let's look at some of the trends and the latest technologies when it comes to how we grow our food. Jacqueline, what are some of the main things that we're seeing today in the field, technologically speaking, with regards to food? What are some of the things that we'd find surprising that are happening today in the field?
It's all about precision. So precision use, precise use of water and nutrients and, if necessary, herbicides and pesticides, absolutely targeted directly where they're required, so that the food is more plentiful, safer, more delicious, and actually cheaper as a proportion of income than it has ever been. And I guess that surprises people. I want to tell you about the peas.
Yes.
The peas on the Canterbury Plains. Who loves baby peas? Because I do. They are my absolute favourite. And this is a triumph of technology. It's not just the tenderometer that Simon feels quite passionate about, checking what their point of ripeness is. It's the fact that they are grown within a certain radius of the freezing factory, that they are drilled and looked after on a calendar basis, absolute dates given for irrigation, checking soil moisture, checking fertilizer status, and the agronomists around with the tenderometer every few days to check how close we're getting to the point of harvest. And when the exact sugar and tenderness is hit for the baby peas, the flags go up at the gate, and we know on the Canterbury Plains that the viners, the people that harvest, will be there within 24 hours. And they come as a group of 5 viners taking the whole paddock within a couple of hours, so that the trucks, and they have a whole fleet of trucks picking up as the viners fill up, will get them to the processing plant, the freezing, within the 4 hours that makes those baby peas just perfect and pop in your mouth. And that's a triumph of technology. And if they miss it, they go to big peas, and if they miss that, then they're to seed peas all ploughed in. But technology has made the difference.
Torben, take us from the factory. Those peas arrive, they're tender, they're screaming, the tenderometer, someone's cuddled those baby peas and realised there's love and passion in there. What happens next?
Well, that was a bit of a surprise question, actually, Simon. So I'm just trying to visualise these peas. Can I just take half a step back and claim the high ground? As a food technologist, we food technologists will claim that we make civilization possible. Now, that's. I mean, if you think about it, before we had food technology, people had to hunt. The whole of their life was looking for food. But it was only when, in antiquity, we began salting food, drying food, putting food in ice over the winter, and having food to store that we could start to live together as communities. And we've perfected that by technology today, so we can live in cities, we can have the arts, we can do things other than food that interest us. So coming back to the peas, we haven't done anything hugely about peas in recent times, but what we have done, taking Jacqueline's point, into industry, is we have also become much more precise in what we do. So by having much better hygiene, having much better control of temperatures and shipping and so on, we've been able to extend shelf life and be able to ship foods further afield and store them in a better condition so that you, the consumer, can enjoy them further away, be it in Britain or somewhere else we might send these to, or here locally out of season. And that really has been what has allowed us to have the variety of diets that we have throughout the year. And so I would say that in technology also, what we've done is we have perfected little things. A lot of incremental improvements have been happening recently.
Martin, is that the type of food that you want to cook with? Is it food that has come through a process into an industrial system, been snap frozen, and then ends up here at your restaurant? Is that the type of food you want to cook with?
Yeah, it's kind of interesting. There's 2 answers to that question, because one is I feel really sad for all the work that you guys are putting into it, because I'm just going to mash them up.
These tender peas are going to get mashed.
The frozen ones
the
frozen ones that come through. I mean, I think the frozen pea is a genius ingredient, right? It's beautiful. They are fantastic to eat frozen. They're beautifully just put straight in. They're the best ice pack in the world, the pack of frozen peas. They're amazing, right? And throw them in a pot with lots of butter and boil them up and mash them. They're great with anything, right? So that's the industrialised frozen pea. I want for the restaurant, what I do, seasonal. I don't want to eat out of season. I mean, it's great being able to have a pea in the middle of winter, and it's wonderful. But pea and ham soup is actually a summer dish. It's not a winter dish at all. So I want the fresh pea, I want the seasonal pea, and I want those peas that you're talking about, but I want them fresh. And that's where, I'll go. And I've picked peas on the Canterbury Plain at Christmas time, with the kids, and they crack underfoot. It's a great experience, and it gives them that connection back to where food comes from, rather than out of a bag. And that's the peas come from the plastic bag with the red letter on the top.
So are we losing our connection on that point?
Well, yeah, exactly. So, I mean, and I said all the time, especially with kids, just mainly through my daughter, who's actually 16, and some of the things that I see with her friends horrifies me, terrifies me, actually, in terms of that connection to where food comes from. And it's not just vegetables, it's also meats and things as well.
And is the system of harvesting and then the supply chain and the technology that is within that, is that there to serve us, the consumer, or is it there to serve the food companies? Torben, you might be best Torben Sorensen to answer that question.
Yes, I'm quite happy to answer that. What you've got to remember when you're buying your food is that the profit margins are incredibly small. Probably the average profit margin to a food company is around 6%. So if you're buying something for $1, the food companies only get half of that dollar. The other half will go to the supermarket and to tax and to distribution and so on. So out of $1, the profits going back to the food company is only about 3 cents. Now, we can't actually make a great deal of living selling you a can of baked beans. But if we sell it enough times, we will start to make a living. And so the only way we can sell it enough times is if the consumer comes back to buy it again and again. So actually, the food industry responds to the consumer. Today, more than half the food we sell is sold through supermarkets. And so we have to prepare food that effectively the consumer can pick off the aisle without anybody advising them to, can read on the label what it contains and whether it's suitable for them and in their particular dietary situation and so on. So it is the consumer who guides the manufacturer. There's many of us who've designed things for a manufacturer, and it's been an absolute flop, despite all the tests we've done beforehand. And so the flops, they very quickly move off the shelves, and you never see them again. So if you go down your supermarket shelves and you think of what you bought last year, you may see one or two things are no longer there. The ones that aren't there are the ones that you didn't pick last year. And so the ones that are there are the ones you are picking, and they'll be replaced by new ones. And if you pick them, they'll come back the year after.
So that says that if it's popular, it will survive and it will stay there as
indeed.
a choice on the supermarket, which, I mean, Laura Vincent, there's a movement today around people growing their own veggies and people keeping chooks and people beekeeping. People are wanting to connect with where their food's coming from and break out of that system that Torben just described, where there's margins and the distribution and it gets smaller and smaller, so the man growing the beans actually gets very little money.
I agree. There's definitely more of a move towards that these days. But I think it's also really important to think about accessibility. I agree with Martin. I love frozen peas. They're so incredibly versatile. You can put them in a million things. And actually, to be honest, I love to cook, but actually a frozen pea might be the one vegetable I eat per day. I've got incredibly buttery risotto, I'm going to put some frozen peas in it, and then I feel like I've got my 5+ a day. So if that's my attitude towards it, then what might be, the thinking of someone that isn't necessarily is into cooking, that needs food fast, that needs to feed a family, that wants to provide nutrition but just doesn't have a lot of time or resource. So I think while it's brilliant that people are focusing on where their food comes from and they're learning a lot more about it, and I think it is really important. I still think it's really incredibly important that the technology is there to allow, more accessibility for vegetables and fruit and food that people need. Who can't necessarily, I myself, I can't grow a garden. I live in an apartment,
What about the in vitro meat movement? And we saw recently, did anyone see that
Yes.
the hamburger?
That's a shocker.
I'm interested, Jacqueline Routh, to get your take on the in vitro meat. Would you eat an in vitro, a lab-grown beef burger? Is that something?
Speaking as a vegetarian, hardly.
I wish I'd known.
I saved it up for you. Mostly there are all sorts of comments about can we do things in laboratories rather than field, but the cost of doing so is so very great. And that was €250,000 to make that one burger, and it didn't actually taste very nice, according to the reviews. We can do corn, which is it's an algae and it uses byproducts of various things, the sucrose industry or the petroleum industry, and we can spin it into anything like chicken or bacon. You can have the mixed grill corn. But I have tried that because I'm a scientist and I'm prepared to do those sorts of things, and besides it didn't come from animal extraction, it's just seaweed type stuff, algae. But it is so resilient to eating, as in it's like the school liver experience. We come from Britain. You remember school liver? And your whole jaw is rattling for some time. So it's nothing like. It's Britain's school food, yes. So the point about it is that it's nothing like real food, and it's very, very expensive. Corn is like Angus Prime, and I think I'd honestly rather buy Angus Prime. I'm vegetarian because I grew up in England, so I could get over it here.
I think the thing with the in vitro beef thing, right? You know, they will do it, you know, and once they get the technology around it, and one of the biggest donators to the in vitro burger program is PETA. Right, in the States, they've given $4 million, I think, as the reward for the first company that can commercialise the whole thing. You know, it had beetroot juice in there, it had saffron in there. You know, there's a million other additives going in there to make it look like a piece of meat, and it's like, what's wrong with a piece of meat?
Yes.
You know, like,
30,000 individual muscle fibres
no fat.
put together to make a patty and then flavoured and
But
dyed.
the point is, though,
at the
that
end of
if
it.
you look at the industry of producing beef today, especially in somewhere like the US, it's not sustainable. So in the future, if people want to eat and consume protein, then surely this type of technology is going to be a get-out-of-jail card.
Well, no, I don't think it is the get out of jail card. I think it's actually going to get us into a whole world of trouble. And as someone who's been in jail a lot recently, it's not a place you really want to be. You know, this for radio, so no one's actually going to understand what that means.
Yes.
So,
We'll go with it. We'll go with it.
Go with it. I'm out now. I think there was a consumer backlash coming to the whole feedlot thing. People are becoming more and more aware of it. You know, we're lucky in this country. We don't know much about it. We drive along State Highway 1, 2, 3. We see cows in a paddock. We see sheep in a paddock, and we don't see those big long barns and those massive feedlots like you get in Europe and the States and wintering over and in Norway. You know, 6-story buildings of vertical farming. You know, where pigs are grown. We just don't have. We can't rationalise that here. But in those countries, they are swinging against it and going, no, it's wrong. And they're asking the questions. The consumers are asking the questions, which is what is influencing, I think. As Torben's saying, you know, the food technologists go, well, how do we answer those questions?
Can we have natural food? We hear this term natural food used a lot in real food. Can we have processed natural food? Is that possible to achieve?
I think we eat it. It has been processed in different ways. Creamed corn is processed. So where are you drawing the line between processed and natural?
I think in the consumer's mind, this is sort of a moving feast, isn't it, really?
I consulted for a number of years to a large multinational burger chain.
And you've been in jail.
And I've been in jail. I'm not sure which was the biggest of the two evils, actually. But working for that burger chain was a really interesting experience on a lot of different levels. And I was designing a range of meals and salads and dressings and things, you know, for them. And so I designed a meal that was to go in a tray and whatever, and it was going to be mass produced through, you know, a big mechanised system with very few humans involved in the whole process. And we were working on the sauces being converted into a powder because it was easier to ship powder. It's lighter, you know, and then it gets on site. They add water and they create the sauce. And we couldn't get the flavour profiles right at all. And you know, behind this sort of mystical door was a lab of food scientists doing things, and I was allowed on this side, but not through the door. And they would bring out a range of sauces, and I'd taste and go yuck, 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 yuck. And then I said, for the love of God, can I just go through the door and this will be a whole lot easier? And I got through the door, and on one wall was, you know, just all these bottles and little essences and sauces and things like that. And that was the natural stuff. And on the other wall opposite that was the nature identical. And that's what we were using. So that, you know, here was lemon essence, but here was nature identical lemon essence. And that's what, so we were trying to create the flavour of a lemon, but using something that was chemically built to match the flavour profiles of a lemon. It's like, this is never going to work. It's never going to work. And that's, you know, that whole processing. And I didn't even know the word, you know, that nature identical food existed. I was like, what's wrong with the lemon juice? That'll work fine. It worked for me. It was, you know, it was a real opener for me.
But Torben, when we take food and we put it into the food technologist lab, there are certain processes that take place that transform that food from something to something else. And I guess my question is, does that still qualify for real food or natural food, the fact you are somehow processing that food?
I guess it depends what we're talking about, but take something, we've raised the spectre of corn. So if you take corn and you take it off the husk and you put it in a can with brine, you heat it up to a certain temperature, and all there is in there is the brine and the corn, and you present that. I don't see how that's very much different to what Martin might do in his restaurant if he happened to be doing something like that. So if you're looking at things like canning, we're not allowed to add, for example, preservatives. Not many people know that, but you can't because there's no need to. The canning process itself preserves. What canning does do, I accept, is that it processes food at a high temperature, and so you do change flavours and you do change textures and so on. But for some foods, if you're making a soup, for example, you should be able to put that together so that it still comes out pretty good. So I think it isn't as easy as just drawing a line in the sand and saying that's processed and that's not. The trend today is to try and prepare foods as naturally as possible. And I know some questions are coming. I'm sort of thinking which way I shall answer the question. But just take us as an example now. I've been involved with something called the Food Bowl, which is a new innovative centre. We may come back and talk about that later. But within that, we've got something called a high-pressure processing vessel. Now, this is relatively new technology. It came out of people who develop guns, believe it or not. And what you do is you take the food and you package it, and then you put it in, and you put so much pressure on it they begin to kill the microbes. Now that begins to happen at about 84,000 psi, or about 60 kilometres down under the ocean to give you your heads around how much that is. Under those pressures, water even contracts by 18%. So when we subject food to those pressures, we don't actually affect the nutrients at all. We don't affect the colour of things like avocados, for example, so we can make naturally looking guacamole and still give it a shelf life. So there is a real pressure on us food technologists to produce things that look natural and that people have an expectation to eat. It is a little expensive. You can imagine a machine like this is obviously quite costly. And so there is a cost to it. But it does mean that we are working towards the ends where people perhaps might be willing to pay a little bit more for something that looks a bit more natural.
Yeah, I mean, we don't all want to go back to the hut and start hunting and gathering. I mean, some of us do now and again on a Sunday afternoon. But
I still like to take the avocado, though, and make a quick guacamole myself rather than going to the bag or the jar and whatever. I mean, that's my...
So you wouldn't go for that 67k subterranean avocado smear?
No, because I think
that's been done in a bullet.
You know, I like the experience of transforming the raw into either cooked or something else. Like taking avocado and making guacamole. I mean, just to use your example, takes no time at all.
But Laura's already made the point. It takes no time for at all if you actually have it. But if you have to go to the supermarkets, it's not always as close as New World or wherever the local supermarket happens to be. So the point about having something on the shelf is that for people arriving suddenly, or the busy mother who has, or father who doesn't have time or hasn't thought about ahead enough to do the shopping, to have something that is preserved on the shelf, I think is a really useful component of what we've done with food recently.
Not to mention you can buy an avocado and then you have to sit there and watch it for 6 weeks while it ripens.
Put it with the banana. Put it with the banana, Laura.
There's no high-tech solutions with that one, is
No,
there?
just put it with the banana in the brown paper bag.
Brown paper bags. Where do you get those these days?
From the mushroom compartment in the supermarket.
We have a thief.
No, I put mushrooms in them first. I recycle.
Hey, I'm Simon Morton. Just to remind you, I'm from Radio New Zealand National, and this is Appetite for Change, a panel discussion hosted by the institution, I should say, of Professional Engineers New Zealand and the New Zealand Institute of Food Science and Technology. My guests this evening are Chef Martin Bosley, Torben Sorensen, Food Engineer and Director of Sorensen Laboratories, Laura Vincent, consumer author and food blogger, and Jacqueline Rowath, Professor of Agribusiness at University of Waikato and President of the New Zealand Grassland Association. Martin Bosley, you are what I would call a celebrity chef these days.
Yeah, I hate that term.
I know you do. I know you do. You're pretty good at it. How has that fame affected the way you cook and the way you transform food today?
It hasn't. I mean, I do what I do, and I do what I do because I love doing it. And food is my life. I read about it, I talk about it, I write about it, I cook it, and clearly I consume it as well. The celebrity thing is kind of around that, and it's a weird thing. You know, I don't know why or where it's come from, and so I don't like the term celebrity chef, but it kind of is a tag that you kind of end up carrying, and so it's not something that I do comfortably at all. However, it has given me amazing opportunities and taken me to extraordinary places along the way. but it hasn't affected the way I cook. It's probably given me more freedom, I think, actually, to cook the way I want to do. I don't feel so confined or constricted because, I guess there's a certain liberation that's come with it.
What about the trust factor? Because surely people now look to you to guide them around that transformation.
Yeah, I think I guess celebrity chefs. I also hate doing air quotes as well, so I'm sorry for that. But, celebrity chef, we have become advocates for farmers markets. I'm such an advocate. I own one. Organic, free range. We've kind of come spokespeople for it. So you are more cautious about what you promote and what you say. Certainly, there is a big degree of that there.
Laura Vincent, you're just about to publish a cookbook,
Yeah.
Hungry and Frozen. Are we still cooking today? Are New Zealanders still cooking?
God, I hope so. I'm about to put a book on the shelves. We better be. I think, and actually, it kind of touches on a bit of what you said about how we don't have to hunt and gather, and so cooking can actually be a leisure activity as well as something that we have to do necessarily to feed ourselves. But I think cooking, it just seems to be almost cultish at the moment. People are quite obsessed with it.
You think?
Yeah, I don't know. Just look at the Food Channel, and if you've been on the website Pinterest, you can type in anything, and there'll be just these pictures of cakes and just thousands and thousands of them, and people just kind of obsessing over food.
So
Which works well for me.
I think that, sorry to interrupt, but I think the rise of food television and the rise of food publications has coincided at a time when people are actually cooking less and less themselves.
Yes.
We're not cooking from scratch as much anymore. We're kind of cooking from scratch because we might do,
more assembly than cooking.
We'll grab the avocado, we'll grab the refried beans from the can, we'll put those things together, and we go, oh, I just cooked dinner. Actually, you didn't really cook anything at all. You reheated a whole lot of ingredients and put things together. And I think, we eat out more, we order in more, but we actually, if you look at what we do, cooking from scratch is probably 3% of the time we spend because we're time poor.
Yep.
As you were saying, it's the convenience of having those things in your cupboard. So, and I think we sit there while hoeing into our meat pie, watching Food Network going, that looks amazing.
6 hours on our
Vicarious
channels,
thrills.
without going for paid television, 6 hours of cooking shows, particularly at the weekend. And the average, this is American data, that says 25 minutes per adult person and this is the person that does the food for the household, 25 minutes for the day in terms of food preparation.
Yeah.
But 6 hours of, not on the food channels, but 6 hours of celebrity shows. I'm glad you're part of it, Martin.
Actually, I don't have my own show, I just want to say that.
Of it.
No.
And so it
That's
is,
not
and
something
actually
I'll see.
there's evidence to suggest that these fantastic things that people are doing on television are actually putting off people from trying it themselves because they know they won't be that good.
So what's happening to traditional cooking, and what is traditional cooking? Torben, are you a traditional cook? Do you get in the kitchen?
Oh, I do actually get in the kitchen. Yes, I have my favourite dishes. I'm more into rundangs and some of those Asian dishes and so on.
Yeah.
And I really enjoy doing those.
So English food then.
Yeah, those who lived in Malaya. So I've spent a bit of time in the East and I've picked that up. I'm a fisherman, so I enjoy catching a fish and putting that under herbs and under glass, as it were. And also I enjoy making sausages and things of that sort. I mean, some of my old food technology comes out. We have a food tech lab, so we bake our own bread and we make our own sausages. I mean, if you've got a lab, you've got to be able to use it, don't you?
And that connection with food, again, is, I'm the same. I love cooking. It'd be my number one pastime, actually, is cooking. But when I was provoked to think, what is traditional food? My tradition is what my mother cooked, but then I've taken that and then it's adapted and evolved and it's changed. And so this idea of traditional food, whether that's informed through...
And is that through global influences that you say it's changed because...
or I've just not had the right ingredients.
Yeah.
Okay. Or I've thought, I'll try
Needs
this.
must.
And it's worked out. I want to look at technology in the kitchen just briefly because it seems that, our kitchens are full of gadgets. I'm not sure... who's got a blender here? Can you put your hands up? Blenders? Bread maker? Okay, smoothie maker.
It's not
Panini
blender.
grill. Yeah, there's a bit of kit out there, isn't there?
An unused melon baller. I have
Show
two
of
of
hands.
them. I
It
don't
doesn't
even.
plug in.
It doesn't plug in.
Doesn't plug. Melon ballers don't plug in.
Oh, is that what's wrong with them?
Yeah.
I wondered why they didn't work.
But technology has crept its way into our kitchens, and I wanted to get each of you to sort of share a gadget that you have that you couldn't do without. Jacqueline, what's the gadget in your kitchen that you couldn't do without?
I don't have one.
What about a knife?
Oh, well, that doesn't
Sorry.
plug in.
Yeah.
I think, you can actually do most things without things that plug in. I think it's quite useful to have something that makes things hot. So I do quite like the gas thing that fires up because, heat's good. But the rest of it, you can actually mash things. But a whiz stick makes it so quick. Fantastic. Love it.
Okay.
So, yes, one of those.
Torben.
Well, when I'm in the kitchen, I actually enjoy two things. We have a little micro grater, and I reckon that's really great for grating things like Parmesan cheese and nutmeg and so on. And that gets you going with some of the fresh stuff. It's quite a good thing to use. And the other thing, I don't use it as much as I should, but when I do lamb, for example, we have a lot of rosemary out in the back of the garden, and we grow our own garlic. So I like to put garlic and rosemary, and I put some olive oil in, and I like crushing it up in my mortar and pestle, and then that becomes the bit that goes over the top. And I like to butterfly the lamb and then really put it into the barbecue hot and, with a bit of olive oil over it and something.
Oh, now
so-
that's
He doesn't plug
watery.
things in
I
at
haven't
all.
had tea yet.
A grater and
I'll see
a...
you something. You should write food porn.
Torben Sorensen. There we go. Laura, your gadget.
I'm going to say my mobile phone, actually, because I love to look at recipes online. I like to I'm not just saying this because it's my own cookbook coming out, but, I make recipes that are on my own blog, and so I'll have them on my phone there, and I'll just have it, by the pot, and I'll be stirring, but I'll also be tweeting, and then I'll sometimes Instagram what I'm cooking. But just so you don't think I'm a total heretic and completely insufferable, I also have a Victorinox knife that I really love. It's small and it's sharp as anything. And yeah.
Do you have tablets in your kitchen?
Old slate ones, yeah. No, that's just putting the food on. I'm not a gadget person at all, actually. My favourite tool, I guess, in the kitchen is I've got this old black cast iron frying pan. I don't know where I got it from. It's been with me for a lifetime, and it's never off the top of the stove, and I do everything in it. And it's like the food, everything that's gone before it makes the next dish happen. There's this. It's well seasoned and it just wipes out and it just lives there. And I'll do roast in it and I'll just do everything through it. I'm a big fan at home of just doing as much as I can and as few implements as I need.
So
it's
what
just
do
me
you
and my
make-
daughter at home, so I keep it
So
quite
Martin
simple.
Bosley, what do you make of the molecular gastronomy movement? Is that something
Well, I've
that
been
you...
there. I was a part of it for a while, and there were a number of reasons why that came about. Right? And one was because very little had changed in food for a very, very long period of time. All around us, society, things were happening, mobile phones were coming up, but we were still kind of cooking traditionally. And then a chef met a food technologist, and they had a conversation. And I had a similar experience myself when I read about this particular chef. And I was working with that multinational I was talking about before, and their food technologist. I said, "Hey, I've been reading about the Spanish guy who does these things he calls them like caviar, spherical balls of things." And the guy went, "Oh, he said it's like first-year food science." He said, "We'll do that now." He grabbed some apple juice from the fridge, added 2 chemicals, and I went, "Oh my God, that's it." And so it kind of demystified the whole thing for me. So, but as chefs, we got really excited by that because it was new, and it involved new equipment, new gear, and we were able to transform ingredients in a million different ways, which we had a lot of fun with. I don't agree with it. I remember at one point we took a beautiful green olive, and we pureed it and we mashed it, and we did a whole lot of different things to it. Then we added a chemical to it. We dropped into a chemical bath, and we made it look like a green olive again. and we put it on the spoon, and then I remember thinking, what was wrong with the olive in the first place? We went through this whole process to recreate the olive, and it was dumb. And so I remember the day where I moved away from it was when I went to the dry store shelves to get some cinnamon, and I had to go past a tub of calcium alginate and a tub of lecithin and something else at the back, and I think something with Lecite, and it went on, and metal and other things. I was like, where is the goddamn cinnamon? I mean, that's what I'm. And I said, Dad said we're done with this. It's got to go. We want to get back to food and flavour, and stripping all that away. We've kept some of those techniques that we learned about, but in terms of, I think, that molecular movement, we're moving on. We're leaving it behind. We've learned a lot from it, but we're leaving it behind.
I want to spend the next wee while just talking about consuming food and how we're consuming food. And I guess we are being provided, one of the things technology has enabled is more and more information about our food. We read blogs, there are labels, there are smartphone apps, and as consumers there is more information available to us, but at the same time we have less time and we want to make informed decisions. So it seems that there's a sort of like contradiction going on, that to be a consumer today, an informed consumer, and Laura Vincent, maybe this is a good question for you, you've actually got to understand a little bit about food technology, science, and how food is grown.
Sure.
Would you agree?
What was the question exactly? I think, technology is definitely influencing how we consume food. I know that, there's I looked on the app store on my phone, and there's over 4,000 recipe apps there. You know what I mean? Like, even if I think even 50 recipe apps would be quite a lot to choose
4,000.
through. Yeah.
But Jacqueline, I mean, you are a scientist. The consumer today has to know, to make informed decisions, actually has to engage with what they're consuming, don't they? It's not just as simple as just read the label.
It depends what it's looking for. The consumer,
that's generic.
Consumer, and I'm with people who say eat things your grandmother would recognise. And actually,
the Michael Pollan.
Well, no, he's got some interesting theories, not all of which I subscribe to. But certainly, does it look normal food, and is it sensible, and does it have the sort of balance of general stuff that we used to do in home economics or whatever it was called? Domestic science, possibly in the UK. Is there a balance of starch and green stuff or red stuff and protein? And if you get that balance right, and eat in moderation, probably you're going to be fine. And one of the problems is that people have been not eating that, they've been eating what they think is cheap and easy. And we end up with some problems in terms of obesity.
Torben, what do you think consumers want from food technologists today?
Well, what we're seeing, of course, is that I guess we've got to understand that the consumer today is really well informed, first of all. The difficulty for the consumer is that whatever view you may have as a consumer, you can have it supported if you look at the right place on Google or whatever. And you've only got to look at present at this debate on fluoride. And anybody who wants to take either side will find sufficient people to support their point of view. And it's the same in food. People will tell you that they're gluten intolerant, even though they are not, and so on. And they will choose and make their choices accordingly. But the things that we're seeing happening is that people are more and more telling us that they're suspicious of food additives. People don't want to have additives in their food. And so we're working in our laboratory. We've got three, we develop products for clients. We've currently got 3 projects on the go, and they're all what we would genetically call clean label. Now, for those of you who don't know what clean label means, a clean label means that we can only use ingredients that you might find in your home pantry, and you don't actually need a degree in biotechnology to understand what the ingredient is. It also means that we tend to not want to see E numbers, that's those numbers that describe what the product is. Now that sounds all very fine, but in fact we're already running into conflict with it. So for example, in the EU, where a lot of these regulations seem to start and then filter down through the international organisations to ourselves, the authorities have said if you are using a natural ingredient and it has functional properties, you've got to give it an E number. So for example, if in Europe I'm using rosemary extract as an antioxidant, and rosemary oil is a very effective antioxidant, I have to put down a number somewhere like 411, I think it is, for rosemary extract. So you can see here we've gone to the trouble of selecting a natural ingredient that you might recognize, rosemary extract. All we've done is taken the oil of the rosemary and we're using it in the food to instead of BHT or one of those other sort of substances that you might not recognize, and we're trying to use something natural, but the authorities are still saying that they want to have their bit in this, and so there are those sorts of tensions coming out in this. But the general thing is that we are trying to create products where we don't use food additives. Now, that sounds easy, but it's not always easy. So, for example, if you want to make a frozen casserole, it's very difficult not using a modified starch if you don't want it to separate when you thaw it out again. And so we're finding different ways of doing it. But that said, we are finding ways of doing it. So we might use fruit. For example, acerola is a fruit with a very, very high vitamin content, vitamin C. So we'll use that instead of erythorbic acid. It's a little more expensive. It is actually more effective, I think. But we can use it in place of one in place of the other. So we're designing products like this. Sometimes they're very difficult to make. We've had one, we've been working on it for 2 years. It goes in production next week. It's been exported to the States. It's a gluten-free product. And the difficulty was that taking the additives out meant it wasn't plastic enough to go through the machinery, and we've had to try and make changes to that. So that's where we're heading with that side of things.
Laura, how are we using technology to find out information about the stuff that we put in our mouths today? Everything, and I'm thinking everything from sort of reputation, the amateur critic these days. People, you see them in restaurants, people will snap their food before they'll eat the dish and then actually
I am that
rate
person, I'm afraid.
You are that person?
No flash photography, though. That's,
Thank God.
Yeah, worst. Yeah, I think that people are really interested in sharing knowledge with each other. You know, I think people like to be seen as knowing things, you know what I mean, as having something to share with people. And I think that social media helps with that. People like to recommend what they know. I don't know if there's a certain amount of cultural capital in that. You know what I mean? It shows that you've
factor.
Yeah, and which, you know, fair enough. Like, it gives you an opportunity to do that. But people like to recommend things, and I think that social media is a way that people are finding out, more about that. But I mean, also Google. Although I mean, Google can be incredibly misleading as well. You know, you can. I think that was a very good point, actually. You can find anything to back up what you want to know.
On the good old
Especially
internet.
with, you know, sometimes research companies are put forward by, say, particular companies, and you won't necessarily know that they're connected to them, but they're putting out this particular research that's exactly what these food processing companies want you to think, you know. Yeah, so.
And it's 2 clicks away on a browser.
Yeah. So.
Martin, how are you handling reputation now and the way it has been commodified in these apps, whether it be TripAdvisor or menumania.co.nz? There are all these sort of ecosystems now where people that are selling products are accountable. I mean, how do you manage that?
TripAdvisor makes me want to rear up like a cobra, actually. Really slow-moving cobra, I might add. I think that whole the social media aspect of what Laura was talking about has become.
You're on that a lot, aren't you? Like, you're on Twitter.
I'm on Twitter, on Facebook. I do all that for us. I am active in that, but within
Why? Just briefly, why are you on Twitter and Facebook?
It's a very important tool for us in terms of I share those stories before anybody else basically can, or I want to let people know what we're doing. It's good for business as well. You know, if we have a table of 4 drop out on a Friday night, or for like Mother's Day or something like that, I can put that out on Twitter and go, we've got a table of 4 just come available, within 15 minutes I'll have sold it, hopefully.
And that happens?
That happens all the time. Yeah, it's very effective. I think people like to see what's going on in the kitchen, or kind of it's almost like a behind the scenes. I mean, people that read it on Twitter, I think some honestly believe I'm talking just to them. You know, like it comes to the thing, and they'll direct message you back going, Martin, that was great, that was awesome. And I go, I don't know who you are, but thank you very much. So I tend not to engage back in terms of replying to people, because otherwise you end up with this big full-on personal conversation, and it just gets kind of weird at that point. But it is important for us to be involved in that arena, but also because people will tweet or Facebook, whatever their choice is, their meal while they're having it in the restaurant, using, sometimes occasionally flash photography, and I've got some shocking experiences of that, to their friends on the other side of the world. So it's almost like the new dinner party conversation is happening globally at the time they're eating, and they're going, oh my God, I'm like, for the love of God, eat the dish, it's going cold. And, because in a minute you're going to go, it was okay, but it was a little bit lukewarm. And you go, well, you spent 20 minutes sitting up, I've got a guy that came in one night with a tape measure and measured it from his mouth to the plate, right, and then got his camera and worked out the whole distance thing so he could get the angle. It was nuts. I'm like, yeah, it's it.
I've never done that.
And then he asked for, was there a PowerPoint? I thought he wanted to, a power plug, because he wanted to charge something. And it was to plug in the little portable flash that went on the table next to his. I'm like, you're here for dinner, son. Like we actually said you've got to put that away, and if you're going to carry on, you've got to go. But it is vitally important. TripAdvisor, we're sensitive to it. I read all of them. I don't engage them, but I look at everyone that comes up. We get obviously we get an alert that comes through. You've just been posted up. There's a couple of sites that that I abhor. And I abhor them, and we've tried to get off them because the nature of those sites tends to be negative. I'm not sure why it attracts people that want to be negative, but it does. And if I think that they've made a valid point, then we will affect change accordingly. But I never engage in it directly. Otherwise, it becomes this. You always look like you're defensive. If you've got someone makes a complaint online, you don't know who they are, you don't know what the experience is, and everybody's a critic, right? They all know. But we take the good from the bad. But we have to be aware of it.
Yes, the amateur critic. I've got to say, I'm in that camp. I travelled recently through Asia, and I was amazed how much I relied on TripAdvisor, especially for accommodation. And actually, it sort of worked for me. Hey, I'm going to wrap up, and I've got a final question for you guys. I want you to sort of look into your crystal balls from where you're sat and look into the future, basically. And Jacqueline, I want you to basically, what do you see as the key trend emerging in your area in sort of agriculture in the next 5 years? What is it that's...
Accountability. Absolutely accountability, being able to account for every unit of carbon, nitrogen, phosphorus, potassium and all the rest of it that we use in agriculture. Nitrates are very good for your protein most of the time, unless you've got a secondary infection, which I don't think you have. So you're fine. You build it into protein. Moving back to water, absolutely. And New Zealand is just going to be in a really good place for the natural food because we have mostly a benign climate and we're able, with our educated agricultural workforce, to capture that sunlight, put it through our plants, possibly into our animals or not if we're growing vegetables, and then, because of our post-harvest technologies, actually get them to the rest of the world more cheaply than they can do it themselves. But I have to say that we can do almost anything you want, given enough time. But how much do you want to pay for food? And right at the moment, New Zealanders pay on average only about 12.7% of household income, which is pretty much cheaper than it has ever been. And I think we should be more grateful to our agricultural producers for doing such a good job and actually mostly meeting the requirements. And we can do it better than most other countries.
Torben Sorensen, what's the future for food technologists? What's the big issue on your horizon?
I guess that for us it will be the ability to produce food that appears more natural than perhaps than the perception is today. That's probably not very well answered. So let me go back on that. I hate to say it, but us food technologists sometimes find ourselves fighting for our reputation. You noticed Laura before said something, and there came this real barb at these food companies, as if there was something terrible that happens behind those closed doors. And in fact, the reason before the closed doors, of course, is hygiene things that we operate our food factories almost like a hospital theatre these days. I don't know if you've been inside one, but you go through and you have to put on gumboots and you have to get undressed in a particular way and dress into the whites and put a hat on and wipe your hands in alcohol and the whole works. It's like going into operating theatre. So we've been working very, very hard, obviously, to create clean food, and we've actually been very successful to the point where people have forgotten that once when you ate food, there's a very real chance of you becoming sick. Whereas nowadays, when that happens, people feel absolutely betrayed. So we need to get our reputation back, and we need to get people to have confidence in what we're doing. I think that's a very big thing. The other big thing for us, I think, as food technologists is, and it's going to become a bigger issue in the future, is what to do with our waste, how we deal with not only the wasted food, but what do we do with the recycled packaging? There's all sorts of things that are going to come out scientifically to where our waste packaging has gone. And people are going to get upset at that. So we're going to be working more at that end where ethics and sustainability and so on come into play. And I think that will be some of the challenges that we'll be working with in the future.
Thank you. Laura Vincent, what do you see as the big issue on the horizon for consumers?
I think what I would really like to see, and it's something you mentioned before, Torben, about how if consumers don't buy something, then it doesn't come back the next year. And that kind of gives me some faith that maybe eventually products like free-range eggs and what I call it, happy pig bacon, will suddenly become the norm, and it won't be so specialised, because you go to some supermarkets and you're lucky if you can find one tray of free-range eggs. And I think as a consumer, you have to pick your battles. I mean, I try and buy free-range eggs always and free-range chicken, but then, goodness knows where half the other stuff I buy comes from. But it'd be great to think that maybe by doing that, eventually there'll just be more choice for everyone, and it'll be a lot easier for people to have products that are better for the environment and better for themselves. Yeah.
Martin Bosley, what do you see as the big thing in food happening in the next 5 years in technology? And as a restaurateur, as a food magnet, you are.
Magnate or magnet?
Yes.
I loathe this question. I loathe this question because I'm always wrong. And I should have gone with Mexican food 5 years ago. I would have been a rich man now. I think it'll be the increase in farmers markets. I think it'll be. I'm with Jacqueline. It'll be accountability. People want to know where their food is coming from. They will be asking more questions, and they will start asking those questions of their supermarkets, not just of their farmers markets. And they'll want to know. They want to know more about their ingredients. They want to know more about their provenance. It's happening now, and to my own waiter's vocabulary, what the questions that our guests are asking of us about the meal on the food on the menu, like where does it come from? Provenance is a big thing. And I think as we see the rise of factory farming, again, people are starting to ask very important questions about that, feed conversion ratios, etc. The demise of the monoculture, I think that'll start in the next 5 years as well. That will change, and possibly the rise of vertical farming. I think that will also start to be a discussion that has to be had at some point quite seriously.
Thank you, guys. And I just really want to sum up. I guess there's no real sort of easy way out for us consumers in terms of how we navigate our way through what's happening. We have technology and science on one hand that's enhancing our food, changing our food, transforming our food. We have more information. And I guess the call to action for us as consumers is to just make sure that we're making informed decisions, making that right choice. And that's not easy. I find that. And I'm paid to look at consumer issues as a job, and it's a case of spend your money, spend it on food, but make sure you make the right decisions. I want to thank Martin Bosley, celebrity chef and cooking guru. Thank you. Laura Vincent, food blogger and Hungry and Frozen. The new cookbook comes out this week. It'll be on the shelves. Torben Sorensen, food engineer and director of Sorensen Laboratories, and Jacqueline Rowath, professor of agribusiness at University of Waikato.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Right, I'm off for a pie. Sorry? Oh, questions? Yeah,
Yes.
sorry, I completely forgot. How self-indulgent. All right, I'll wait for the pie. Yes, questions. Fire away, because I'm sure there are a few out there.
I have a question to Jacqueline. You say 12.7% of our income is spent on food. Is that what you said?
Yep, that's the FAO figure.
Well,
So
how much of what proportion of the income of the lowest decile does food represent?
entirely depends on what the lowest, the brackets, and how they're then spending their income. So I can't give you the figures off the top of my head. I can tell you that University of Otago says that it is absolutely possible to feed a family of 4 nutritionally. Actually, I can give you the figure for a 21-year-old Wellington male, and it's well below. Then you add the rate, the rental and power and all of that sort of thing. It's something like $125 nutritionally for a week. So
That's not a proportion of income.
No, I can't do that calculation for you because I've given you the proportion of income from the FAO, which does it for the whole of the world. And so Australia is 12.1%, most of Europe's around 14%. But remember that in most of developed countries, the farmers are subsidised to produce, whereas New Zealand isn't. And in Australia, they have a certain small amount of subsidy as well. In America, it's 6.7. Is that median income? Sorry, I'm confused. No, that's average. Yep. So that is the FAO figure. If we then start looking at what the average New Zealand household income was for New Zealand statistics, we can say that the household income went up 2.8% last year, and the consumer price index went up 0.7%, and the food index went up 0.6%. So on average, everybody was better off. But I agree with you, that's not the same thing as the lowest decile. University of Otago says it's perfectly possible. The question is, why are 18-year-olds spending $5 a day on discretionary stuff that's, coffee? Delicious, wonderful coffee, but twice as expensive as milk. And milk is 2 litres of food. So it's the way income is spent that is the problem. And that was the Westpac figure, $5 a day on impulse purchases, mostly in garages, the coffee or the Coke or the whatever at the time. So budgetary, I agree with you, but food is overall cheaper than it has ever been as a proportion of income. And safer. And more delicious, and more variable. And better prepared. All of those things make a difference. 20 minutes a day for preparing food. My mother spent all day in the kitchen. Well, it seemed like that.
Well, actually, the question I wanted to ask segues right into that. The panel's painted us a wonderful picture of how we've moved from a situation where we had to spend all our time chasing, gathering, or growing food, and we had no time for anything else, to our current situation where through technology and industrialisation, we spend all our time doing everything else, and we have absolutely no time for preparing our food. But we're actually moving beyond the industrial era to the post-industrial era when we can rethink our time use as a society. And I'd like to ask the panel, given this opportunity that's opening up, what would be your strategy for encouraging people to reinvest some of their time back into their food?
I think we've already got it. It started at primary schools, and there's been a whole generation where growing food was not part of the curriculum, but now we've got, I think it's up to about 10-year-olds, they're coming through at primary schools having their own gardens. And then it's moving through, because we do have agriculture and horticulture in the curriculum now, some schools at secondary having gardens as well. And they take their knowledge back to their parents, but I would also point out that there are community gardens. And the problem with community gardens and planting, and there are a lot now in South Auckland, for instance, is vandalism, and I just shoot them.
And eat them.
I'm vegetarian.
I love that idea of the community garden thing. There's one of my favourite spots in Wellington is the Tenera Community Gardens, just at the top of Brooklyn there. It's a really special part of this town. I agree.
You shoot them as well?
Sorry?
Oh.
Shoot who?
No, shoot the vandals.
Yeah, no, I wouldn't actually. No, I do other worse things to them than shoot them.
Okay.
After my experiences, I know there's a lot worse things you can do than just shoot somebody.
Okay.
But I think it's awareness. It's dining socially. It's sitting around a table and encouraging that kind of behaviour. Of family time and the importance of it. And even if it's just like 15 minutes, sit around the table and stop and break bread and share some stories and understand the cultural importance of that dining has and learning about ingredients and talking about it. I've got a great story about a girl that came to stay an overnight sleepover with my daughter who, Isabella said to me, just do something really simple, Dad. And I said, okay, I'll do roast chicken. And the chicken came out of the oven, the whole chicken. And this girl, who was 11 at the time, said, what's that? And I said, it's a chicken. And she said, that's not a chicken. I said, it's a chicken. She goes, I've had chicken. And the conversation went on, and a chicken to her was a boneless, skinless breast in a black tray. And when her mum cooked her she said, we're having roast chicken for dinner. That's what she thought a chicken looked like. So it's you just got to break away from that and get them involved in food and involved in the preparation of it, and get them in the kitchen. And it doesn't take long. I mean, my mum used to seem to spend hours in the kitchen making dinner as well. But that's, I think it's just like a childhood memory now. When I talked to her about it, she was like, "Oh God, no." She was like, "Oh no, gosh, you're lucky to spend an hour on it." You know, I was busy. I was doing all these other things.
Yeah, I just personally, having done through this way up on, I've been on various voyages of discovery of making cheese and curing meats and raising chickens and beekeeping.
Getting honey. Yeah.
There's nothing, connecting with your food, there's nothing better than actually being involved with the production. And then, as Martin says, I think the conversation around people that come to the house and the kids, and it's all, it's sort of the essence of humanity and for me, actually, it's sort of that going out there and getting that food and bringing it in and knowing that I've actually crafted and been involved with its production and then giving it to someone and watching their response.
But if you do the calculation on the cost of that...
accountability.
As long as you regard it as a hobby, that's absolutely fine.
It is.
I don't know. I think, just to touch on my recent experiences in Rumataka prison, I mean, one of the things that's happened there is, two things. One is prisoners in this country are fed on $4.50 a day. That's breakfast, lunch and dinner, right? And that is a nutritional meal that is low fat, low sodium, ticks all those boxes, but has no gustatory experience whatsoever. You don't want to be in there, right? You certainly don't want to be in there for the food, that's for sure. But opening... the transformation that's happened with the men that I was working with in the prison kitchen, because food had no context or very little context to them in their lives prior to prison. Certainly while they're in prison now, it's got no meaning whatsoever other than it's what they set the clock by. And if it's late, there's trouble. And for some of those men in there, it's the best meal they've ever had in their lives. They go, I eat really well when I'm inside. Which is a terrible indictment on so many different levels. But what we've shown them now through this program that we've been doing through the last 9 months is where food could take them going forward and how they can feed their families. So what we've taught these men now is, a man that can cook can feed his family, a man that can find a job, can get a job, can earn money to feed his family. And this whole thing has been around learning how to feed people. You take one fish, we made 5 dishes off the one fish. And shown them the possibilities and the potential that is out there, and it's given them a degree of self-confidence. It's given them a degree of self-awareness. So many other things have happened as a result of just basically learning about food, where it's come from, how to prepare it, and more importantly, prisoners in this country eat by themselves. They eat in their cells on their own. They don't sit around a communal table at all, and most of us don't appreciate that. And they're locked up at 3:30 in the afternoon, and they're fed at 4 o'clock. And the door doesn't open again until 6:30 the following morning. So it's a long time to be on your own. So at 10 o'clock at night, there's no going to the fridge for a little sneaky bit of cheese. We sat at a table in the main kitchen and we ate, and we shared stories, and it was extraordinary. And just seeing in terms of how they grew out of that has been astonishing.
Would you like to add anything? No, I've been told another question over here.
Hi. I just noticed recently one of the last few years there's been an increase in people who have an intolerance to, say, dairy or gluten. And I just wanted to know whether you think this is due to difference in food processing, or is it the human body changing, or is it just kind of more awareness? Just your opinion of that.
All of those things. Number one, these days, people get through childhood illnesses in a way that would have wiped them out in the past. And if I asked you all to put up your hand and went through the various illnesses that would have killed you in childhood, I would expect a third of you to be left. So my father didn't die of an asthma attack at 4, sprogged 4 children, eventually died from one at 66. But in the meantime, he has children who are highly allergic to all sorts of things, and I have got through childhood asthma attacks and allergic attacks because I was taken to hospital and survived. I chose not to have any children, so moving on from there, I haven't passed on those genes. But certainly we have produced a less fit population by getting through childhood illnesses. Add on to that the fact that we move around far more. So the peanut allergy, for instance, very few people used to eat peanuts, and now there are people who are so allergic to them that they are no longer peanuts, that is, served on aeroplanes because they can cause an anaphylactic attack. But there's also what is termed potentating, so that here Torben has Nordic ancestry, and they grew up, the Nords? Well, that lot grew in
the Vikings.
The Vikings. The Vikings grew where silver birches grow, and there's been some interesting research published in Science and Nature that if you take a Mediterranean person who understands about olive oil and tomatoes, and they then live in Nordic countries, the very fact that there's birch pollen around potentates them to allergies of different types. So we've then got people muddled up in that sort of way geographically. But the third one is absolutely the gluten one you mentioned. Scientists, because people like fluffy white bread, have deliberately bred wheat with high gluten in to make even fluffier white bread, and indeed we then add it to the product to make it even fluffier. So it was a reaction to the consumers, because otherwise it might not have been on the shelves next year. So we've done it deliberately but didn't understand the consequences. And then, of course, there are things like sulfates. Torben and I have been talking about them, so some people might be more reactive as it builds up. But your comment about the awareness is also part in the literature, that's particularly in the younger generations and the me generation, because if you've got an allergy, it makes you special and different. And therefore you can go to a restaurant and say, I'm special and different, speaking of all the allergies in the world. But and there it's the focus thing. So it's a very complex answer, and all of those are factors. And Torben has some theories as well.
Yeah, well, I guess the thing that I'll add too, the other thing that has complicated this is Google and all the other media around. So if you look at, say, something like gluten intolerance, we know that in New Zealand we've got, say, roughly 1% of people would be classified as celiacs. But only 1 out of 5 or 4 of those will be diagnosed as celiac. So we've got some people who've got a gluten intolerance that haven't been diagnosed with that. But then we've got, because of the media, we've got a whole host of people who think they're gluten intolerant, and will go around claiming this. And in the States, where they're a wee bit ahead of us, the forecast for the immediate future is that 30% of people will be saying they're gluten intolerant, but they're not much different to us. So the whole media thing has hyped people up, and I think it's almost. For a while we had sugar and what else? There's been all sorts of fads, and really these things are mixed in with reality with fads, which makes it even more difficult for us to get a proper handle on what's actually going on.
I like Jacqueline's comment, though, that basically 2/3 of us would be dead. I don't want to end on a downer, but that's the reality. Yeah. Final question.
Hi, it's come up a few times tonight. The idea of people wanting to eat locally if they're trying to reduce sort of their ecological impact. Do you think that generally is that a prudent idea, or as people who have more familiarity with the food processing industry, are there better ways to try and reduce your impact rather than, say, eating something that's only come 100 kilometres of where you live?
That would make you unhealthy in New Zealand because of some of our interesting nutrient things.
Yeah, I was just going to say that.
So actually, imported food in New Zealand generally eats about 40% of what we eat is from other countries, which is terrific. I'd be looking at where the crop is best well grown. If you ate within 200k or 100-mile diet is the usual thing, you would be very limited in what you could eat. So I would say eat in moderation, sensibly. Is it sensible to eat apples in season or tomatoes in season? Absolutely. But part of that's because of your budget. If I was in Australia when the tornadoes had wiped out the bananas, and they were $5.50 Australian each. Well, don't buy them then. people complaining about the more $15, $16 tomatoes. Well, don't buy them. Sorry, that will mean they probably go out of being in the hothouses during winter.
I totally agree.
But
Buy canned
it's
tomatoes
sensible.
in winter.
So,
Well, I want to
it's
incinerate
moderation.
asparagus that's for sale in winter that says imported from
But
the
it's
USA.
coming from Peru. Don't
Strawberries,
buy it.
they're all watery.
So don't buy it from Peru.
I guess I would add one more thing. If you really want to know about health, you almost have to go and talk to a farmer. And every farmer in New Zealand knows that if you want healthier animals, you have to supplement with cobalt, with selenium and various bits and pieces. Because if you don't, they won't breed properly and they won't grow properly. So next week when I get back, I've got a few lambs. We're going to inject them with an injection, and that'll have the cobalt and the various minerals. If you don't have those, you yourself won't be healthy. So one of the disadvantages we have in New Zealand, being a new geologically country with the geology we have, is that you will not be well. My advice to everybody here tonight, if I was to say something, is when you go home or in the mornings, just make sure you have your Brazil nut, because that'll give you your selenium.
There we go. Thank you, everyone. Thanks so much for coming along this evening, and I hope you go off and have a plentiful night. There's lots of options for dining this evening in town, so make wise choices. But thanks a lot for coming along, and thanks to the panellists.